Welcome to the Justin Johnston Show. I'm Justin Johnston. I'm a commercial real estate agent. That's what I've done for 20, almost 9 years now. Sell, lease, office, and industrial properties along the Wasatch Front, Salt Lake, Utah County. And I'm here today, and before I introduce my guest, we always try to tie something into real estate. As we drive up and down Interstate 15 or on any road, you look off, there's buildings there. There's residential, sometimes farming, industrial properties. Somebody's managing those properties. Somebody's occupying those properties, or they're not, and it's being mismanaged maybe. But at the end of the day, we are driven by real estate. We live in homes. We occupy and have our schools, the dedicated ground for that, our Capitol buildings. It's real estate. Everything revolves around real estate one way or the other. And of course, there's lots of ways to fund the education system, which is what we're going to talk about here today, is the public school and systems there, which we're going to go a couple different directions. But in Utah, we fund our public schools with property taxes.
Yeah.
And of all the property taxes, when you look at it, and I was trying to pull my one receipt out from making that payment, it showed how much was going in for my building in Provo here was going to, I think, the
Provo School District, yeah.
My home, I live in Spanish Fork, it's a big portion of it. It's probably, about 70%?
Yeah, it's a good chunk of your property taxes going to the school district in the area you live in, yeah.
So we pay that every year. It's the one tax that doesn't, if you want to be frugal and not spend and blow your money on anything else, you own real estate, you're going to pay that every year.
Right, and those mortgage companies are going to keep it in that escrow account and make sure it gets paid every year.
Yeah, they want to make sure that doesn't get taken back from the state, because they'll take that. But
right.
So we're talking to Cole Kelley. Cole Kelley is a friend of mine. We go back 30, 40 years maybe.
The glory days at Pleasant Grove High School, right? So, yeah, I was good friends with your brother, David.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, about 3 years. Were you in the same grade, right?
Yeah.
Same grade, yes. It was about, and I knew his parents, wonderful people, wonderful family, and driven, always known for wrestling. And I like the whole family, I say that, but it's the two. Clint, he wrestled as well, right?
Yeah. Clint was kind of seen as more the baseball player, and I was more the wrestler. But we both did both. Yeah, so we both played for Coach Hoover and Coach Henry back in those. Those were two phenomenal coaches.
Yeah. And Coach Henry, I loved him. He coached football as well, and he was there. I liked him in that realm. I was a little scared to actually go into the wrestling program just because it was so intense. It was but it was fun. I'll tell you what, in Pleasant Grove, the matches or games you wanted to go to was wrestling. They were intense. I mean, we'd fill them all the way up to the rafters, right?
Yeah.
And it was a fun program.
Sure.
To just have a part of the school, and we dominated for years and still have and do, except for your coaching over at.
I'm a rival now. I'm at crosstown rival American Fork High School, and I'm the head wrestling coach at American Fork High School right now.
How long have you been doing that?
The head coach, I've been the head coach now the last 2 years. I was the head coach at Orem High School for 10 years. And I, in between the 10 years at Orem and when I've kind of come back at American Fork, I ran a private club. We called it Metal Wrestling, and we built the biggest private wrestling club in the state of Utah. So actually, we were recognized as one of the top 10 clubs in the country. So, yeah.
That's amazing. That's good. So that is something that you just kind of started yourself.
I mean, my own boys kind of got to the age where I admire Coach Henry. I admire what Coach Henry did, but I've watched too many coaches spend too much time with other boys and not their own boys, and I didn't want to make that mistake. So I wanted to make sure I spent my time with my boys, and so I spent quite a bit of time. I had 2 girls right off the bat, but when my son was old enough to get on the mat, that's when I stepped down as the head coach at Orem High School and started a private club, and we started to grow that thing. So from the time that he was probably 6 or 7 years old till my youngest got into high school, I was running that club. So
I do remember hearing about that. I didn't realize that was your baby and for your boys. That's awesome. You've been involved with your kids, and I know you said your daughters are excelling as well. The reason I point this out, I think you have a daughter that's Division A1 cheerleader and dance. Is that right?
So I have 3 daughters. My oldest is she's actually a buyer for Nordstrom. She's got a dream job, one in the fashion world. She just loves it. But Capri's been very successful in that realm. Then I've got a daughter that danced. She was a Cougarette at BYU, and if you know anything about the Cougarettes at BYU, I tease BYU football fans all the time. If you want to cheer for a team that wins year in and year out, you need to cheer for the Cougarettes, all right? Because they don't disappoint.
Yeah.
But she was a Cougarette. She did 4 years as a Cougarette, and just this last year decided her senior year. She's still going to school. She's finishing up her schooling, but she married a guy that's on the football team, and so she's just being the football player's wife now, and she's taking care of him, and
that's great.
And then my youngest daughter Sadie is a cheerleader. She's a 5'11" cheerleader at BYU, and so she's my worker. She worked hard to get to where she's at. I always wanted her to be a swimmer. She was phenomenal in the pool. Yeah. She wanted to be a cheerleader, so so she put the time in, worked her butt off, and she's there.
That's awesome.
So
it's a great track record on that. And anyway, that's it. I mean, driven and so I knew you were having success and doing these things. Social media, we kind of keep track of each other a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Seeing what we're doing from time to time, who's posting. Some people do or don't.
And if you haven't, I'm a proud dad. Absolutely, I'm a proud dad. So
you're posting that stuff and you're doing it, and you're involved, and so I'm watching this stuff happen. So I'm plugging in, but you are a teacher in the Alpine School District,
correct?
And this last year you ran for the board, Alpine School District board.
Yeah, so I ran for the Alpine Board of Education. There were 4 of us that filed to run. With local school boards, you don't run as a party. You run as a non-affiliated candidate, so you don't run as Republican or Democrat, and it's nonpartisan. But one thing that was unique that happened this last election cycle is the Utah County Republican Party said, "Hey, we want to try to endorse candidates, and we want to try to find who are really candidates that represent our views." And so they didn't do anything official, but they did an endorsement. And what you had to do, you had to win 60% of the delegates' vote to win the endorsement of the Utah County Republican Party. And that was something I was proud to say that I won. Is I won the endorsement of the Utah County Republican Party, got 60%, over 60% of the delegates that voted to endorse me as the candidate for the Alpine Board of Education. I ended up making it down to the final 2 to the general election. I lost in the general election, but I don't regret doing that. In fact, I'm happy to announce that I'm going to throw my hat back in the ring, and I'm going to run for State Board of Education this time. So,
which is now you filed to do that?
So I filed here just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so I filed to run for the Utah State Board of Education. It's in District 12, and it's kind of a unique area. It covers Vineyard, Orem, and it kind of is like a rectangle straight east. It goes from Vineyard to Vernal, and so it includes Heber City, it includes Roosevelt, Vernal, Duchesne, a lot of those rural areas, Altamont, etc. So,
really interesting, and that will be part of this next election, the general election.
Yes, so that will be. You can actually win the nomination. This one you do run as a Republican or a Democrat. Okay. So for the State Board of Education, I will be running as a Republican. Okay, and the current incumbent is a Republican. So I'll have to beat him in the primary if I beat him in the primary, then I will be the Republican nominee moving into the election in November. Now, the good thing is there's no Democrat that filed to run. Okay, so really so if whoever wins the primary will be the board member for that area. So, yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit off camera.
Yeah.
Before we were getting to know each other a little bit more and having that discussion, and we were discussing the last 50 years, what's changed, right? I mean, the facilities are nicer, right, than what I remember when we were there. You know, when I show up to the games, it's like, man, facilities are nicer, the schools are nicer, so there's I think there's an idea that, hey, if we give the very best experience, right, that and they're looking past me what the actual experience is, but I mean, I've got a lot of opinions of what I think maybe could change, right? Changes. Whenever I bring it up, I'm not in the system now. Everybody that knows me knew my my credentials as far as high school. Now, when I got in college and was paying for it, I was like, hey, I found out I was a little smarter than I thought. You know?
Right.
I mean,
right.
I actually was like,
and when you put your mind to something, yeah.
Like this particular subject, and I was pursuing those types of things, but it's such a big part, right? It's public school. It's what every kid is going to go into, and you get all the different backgrounds, all of single mother, traditional homes, people that are all the different education. We kind of have one here, not just education, religious things. You know, there is a dominant religion in the state of Utah.
Sure.
Everybody knows that inside and outside the state. But even within, a lot of people don't know, within the church here in Utah, there's divisions of what should be maybe the way people have
different perceptions. Yeah, perceptions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's dominated by that religion. There's no doubt about that. But it's as fractured inside that as to what we think things should be ran, or so on and so forth. Especially with public education funds that we're paying our taxes on. So
right.
Having had that discussion, I came up with a school. An idea for a school, and it would be get rid of, I shouldn't say maybe all the sporting events and things like that, unless you were really, it's a little hard when I say this because I don't know, I have not thought through all that stuff. The sporting events and all that, the clubs, I'm not sure what to think about on that, but I think my idea was get up, go to school in the morning, you're done at noon, you don't have school lunch, you're not there in the afternoon, you bring a sack lunch, or you can do it, and then kids are working at some type of a trade. They're going to a job. Now, they say, well, what about elementary? And I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of things those kids can do, a lot of things. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be at a level, right? But it's like, even if it's maybe they stay and they clean the school every day, right? I mean, they're going to go in and clean the toilets.
You and I should get together.
Okay.
Because there's certainly, like, you have an entrepreneurial spirit about you, and I'm kind of unique. There's not very many school teachers that have an entrepreneurial spirit to them. I consider myself to be somebody that is an entrepreneur, and I've actually built a wrestling business. I'm one of very few people that you'll ever meet that are making money in the sport of wrestling.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. I think the free market. It improves things. It improves things.
We are so much more alike than I thought we were. So my thought was I had thoughts with the sporting and clubs and things like that. I thought, you know what? Coach Henry would have been involved in wrestling, right? I mean, or say maybe he wasn't, right? There would have been somebody that wanted to champion a program, right? Sports, school, so the point is, it's not, it could be part of that school. It could be part of that school. It could be part of all sorts of things. You stopped to have a program for your boys because you wanted to have them. You wanted to be involved in their life that way. You ended up changing the program, starting a new program, being involved, recruiting kids that maybe never would have went into wrestling.
Right.
And then you create this program that take exactly what you did, and that could be accomplished in an open market, right? So the school. It's there regardless, right? And it's to teach the basics. and to not get caught up in all the other things, reading, writing, arithmetic, finances, how to balance a checkbook, those things that when I graduated, the school didn't teach me any of that stuff. And even if my parents were teaching me, there's some other skills I think that we could incorporate over that time that you're in high school, right? Or schooling, right? You're going to get up. But at the end of the day, you're learning more because we all have to go get that job, right? After, right? And so to learn a trade or to be involved at it, I've always believed that there was going to be another person like you, right? There's a lot of other kids that went to Pleasant Grove, did the wrestling program. You had your own ideas with. Before we get into the education part, we were talking about how this wrestling program in the state of Utah has changed. I said, how? What? Because we were talking about schooling not changing for the last 50 years. Same teachers aren't paid enough.
So I mean, part of what I 50 years. What have you seen change in education in the last 50 years, right? And we continue to complain about the same issues. We've been talking about teacher pay and classroom size for over 50 years. And has classroom size gotten any better? And has teacher pay gotten any better? And we were sitting around the lunch table today with a handful of our teachers, and when you start comparing teacher salaries to inflation and where teachers start at and home values and what it costs for a young teacher, you're pushing a lot of people out of the industry because they can't afford to teach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where we start them at. And so it's not gotten better, okay? You get in the industry and you've been in the industry for 27 years like I have been, and I got 2 master's degrees. I don't know how smart that is. I think it's actually maybe a little bit dumb that I did that, but it helps me on that pay scale, right?
Well, you need the credentials to move forward. So for sure.
I move up that pay scale.
Stuff, right?
Right. I mean, but that's questionable. So, but the definition of insanity is doing those same things over and over again. And one of the things that I did, I mentioned to you about 20 years ago in the wrestling world, right? I've got this entrepreneurial spirit, and I got into the business of running wrestling tournaments and running wrestling events. When I was a young kid, we used to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd go weigh in at some gymnasium at 8, from like 8 to 9. And then we'd sit around and wait. We'd go to breakfast somewhere and wait around for them to kind of pair up who's in what weight class and who's wrestling who and who's where on the bracket and things like that. And so we'd show up at 7 a.m. We'd start wrestling by 10 o'clock in the morning. But then everybody's all there at the same time, and we'd be there till 7 p.m., right? Yeah. And for the diehards, which I'm a diehard, like we're there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and we're going to do that. We're going to do that weekend after weekend, right? But I'm looking at it, and my kid's mom, and she was my ex-wife. I don't like the title, but whatever. She was at the time had no exposure to the wrestling world, right?
It's madness.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, she don't want to hang around from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. like all day on every Saturday, right? And so I started to look at just different ways that we could do it. But we changed a couple of things. We changed the way we did weigh-ins. We started doing staggered starts. And like my tournaments were by far the most successful tournaments in the state. So what ended up happening is everybody started following that model. And what's happened to wrestling in Utah over the last 20 years is we've been able, our numbers have significantly increased. We actually in Utah right now have 5 full-time employees that work for USA Utah Wrestling and are dedicated. Their full-time job is working to help wrestling. And a lot of that is because of the way that we kind of structured how we run tournaments, and the tournaments now they have caps on them, and we sell out every Saturday. There's 3 or 4 tournaments around the state per weekend, and if you don't get registered early, you don't get in.
That is a huge change.
Yeah, I mean they're selling out. And we used to have 1 per weekend, and it would we'd be there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now we've got 3 or 4 per weekend all over the state, and they're all very successful. I run the two biggest events in the state. I run the Rockwell Rumble, which is a high school wrestling tournament. This last year we had 80 teams from 8 different states. There were 1,800 athletes there. We run that at the indoor soccer facility up in Harriman at the Salt Lake Real Indoor Soccer Arena. And then I run the Salt Lake Slam, which is a youth tournament, which we had 1,200 kids from 24 different states this last year. And so they're two, of the premier events in the state. And the model that I've kind of developed there is what has, developed throughout the state, and it's shown tremendous results. Yeah.
Obviously, that's going to have an effect on the high school programs. And now, college, are the schools across the country and the state, are they still having the program, the wrestling? I know everything kind of changed with the scholarships and things like that. Have the programs, have they grown too? And those educational?
Or
is that not the
college wrestling is rough. It's tough because Title IX killed wrestling at the college level. A lot of people look at Title IX as a champion of women's sports. I think a lot of things contributed to the growth of women's sports, and I celebrate the growth of women's sports. But it hurt a lot of male sports along the way, and wrestling and men's gymnastics, even baseball. Some of those more minor sports were suffered because of Title IX. We had a lot of programs, and so what happens now is you look at a school like Brigham Young University, who has to be in compliance with Title IX because they accept federal funding. They're going to offer 5 male sports and 10 female sports because the numbers, when you throw a football program in there, there's 80 scholarships that you've got to come up with for women just to equal out the football program, and that's why the only it's actually, we just added Snow College not too long, just a few years ago, but up until the addition of Snow College, Utah Valley University was the only Division I college wrestling program in the state of Utah. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that actually. I knew Title IX and what it did. It was happening when I was, when did it actually come into?
Yeah, no, it was 1972 is when I was born, and that's when it came into law. But it really started to, and so
took some time to get in there.
Yeah, when I was in junior high, Weber State had a program, Utah State had a program, University of Utah had a program, BYU had a program. By the time I graduated from high school, BYU was the only program left. So
I remember Gary Sanderson, a brother-in-law of mine. I think that he wrestled there.
Yeah.
Did you wrestle there? No,
I did not. No.
Aside from that, it's interesting. So now, one thing that's changed, and I don't know if this we're not going down the school district route right now at this point, but it does all tie in, right? To at least programs, and what we talked about off air was that why right? You're going to keep running in the elections, but the programs for wrestling, right? You changed that. I mean, it was something you've seen, something that changed from public policy, and then on the side, what I was going to point out here is, I think it was when I was in my mid to late 20s, we'd go up to some of the bars because that's where that Ultimate Fighting or MMA, right? I mean, they'd have those cages, and it would be something kind of like, hey, this is crazy, you know what I mean? That full contact, and as I'm not a huge follower of that. Every time I watch it, I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is crazy because I'm not a spectator. I can't go. I played football. I enjoyed it. I cannot sit through a football game. I'm not a spectator, right? When I watch some of those fights, I get cottonmouth, right? I mean, I'm sitting there and I reached, my wife's like, she says, I'm bending one of my fingers. It's intense, right?
Right.
It's an intense, and so jiu-jitsu and all these other striking fighting. I've heard some of the experts, I listen to Joe Rogan,
sure,
Jocko Willink, stuff. They talk about maybe one of the best base fighting skills you can have is grappling wrestling, right? And they're just like, because you just learn so many things about balance and holds and submission type things, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting sport, right?
Yeah.
Which is Maybe because my lack of being able to be a spectator. As I've got my grandsons coming up, I thought, man, I don't know what I would want them to go into. Like I don't think I want them to play football.
I'm the dad of 2 wrestlers. I don't know that I want them to go into MMA. I can tell you that right now, right?
Because it's a great skill to have.
But here's the thing that's interesting. Like most people, when they watch it, they see the gore. When I watch it, I see the sport. And it truly.
All the technique, who's doing what and how
correct.
they're able to beat and win.
Like one of my funnest coaching experiences is there were some guys that opened up a gym right here in Orem called Throwdown, okay? And I would go in on I think it was Tuesday night. Every Tuesday night, I would go in with this fight team, and I would work with them on their wrestling skills, okay? And so we would do some wrestling, and one night they would do wrestling, and one night they would do striking, and another night they'd do some grappling. And so they had different nights where there were different skills that they would work on. So Tuesday night was my night, and I'd come in and work with them on wrestling. Yeah. And it's like some of the relationships with the guys there. Court McGee, who's fought several times in the UFC, Derek Downey, who fought in the UFC. There's Ramsey Nijum that was in that group that owns a gym up in Salt Lakes, fought in the UFC a bunch of times. Steven Seiler that was in that group. It was a fun group of guys. It really was. And they were phenomenal athletes. And I had the privilege of getting to work with them just on their wrestling skills. And I went in and I had it was fun. It was a good experience for me. But that's when I really started to understand the sport and really tried to, learn an appreciation for that sport. But you were there, and I was there coaching those guys. I cornered a handful of those guys, and it was fun. Yeah,
very interesting, and to see where it's gone, right? And I say that just because it's interesting. You say Title IX eliminates some of the men's sports that were casualties of that, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about programs that come from high school, junior high, up through, right? Well, that's what it ends up being, right? To go on to some of the, and yet at the, it's probably, I don't know the statistics on that other than it's one of the fastest growing spectator sports, right? I mean, because it is so intense, right? It gets the guy that's like, like I said, if I go to a football game, I'm watching the game, right? I'm a tactician that way, and I'm like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Over pursuit and all that. You know what I mean? I'm looking at I'm screaming. You know what I mean? At the TV or something, and so nobody wants me around on it. And but at the end of the day, it's very intense, right? Yeah. But it's been some of these things that as we've had some of that division, men, women, sports. I agree. I think there's a lot of reasons why the women's sports have flourished, right? Sure. It took a while for that to become more popular and for people to excel in it, Right. And women's soccer. I don't mean to get but there's a separation. Like there's some things that the women have really just excelled in. That as there weren't any programs, for that, before, and so, So without getting into that, which is because off air you said, look, I'm going to keep running for the board because. When you got those endorsements, from the Republican Party, right? That from the people that are actually the Republican. When you say who was it? The group of people that were.
So it was the Utah County Republican Party. Yeah.
So those people are the ones that backed you on that, right?
The delegates, yeah.
Yeah, the delegates. Yeah. That's the term I was looking for on that. The delegates there, and so. Well, it's going to fold in a little bit better, but you only have the Republican. We already went down that.
Yeah. So for the State Board of Education, you do run as with the party. So I will run as, and you can actually win in the convention. And there's a state convention, right? And if you get 60% or more of the votes in convention, then you can come out of that process the Republican nominee. There was a bill that was passed, I don't remember when, but it basically allowed candidates to bypass the convention process. This is how we got Mitt Romney, okay? Mm-hmm. Mitt Romney, he actually, his opponent didn't get the 60% or more, so they actually probably would have went to a primary anyways, but he lost at convention, but it was like 55-45.
Kennedy on that.
That was Kennedy, yes.
Yeah, I liked him a lot.
Yeah, but then it went to a primary, and Romney ended up beating Kennedy in the primary, right? But they can check a box when they file to run that says, hey, if I don't win at convention, I'm going to go get signatures, and I'm going to bypass the convention process, and I still will end up on the ballot in the primary. And my opponent checked that box. So if I don't get at least 40% of the vote at convention, then I'm out because I didn't check that box. I believe in the convention process.
Yeah. And
the delegates are well informed. The delegates do their due diligence. They know the candidates.
Yeah, they do know that.
You know,
sure.
and so I love the convention process. I'm confident that I'll come out of the convention with 60% or more. But in this case, it's not going to matter. It's going to go to a primary because my opponents check that box, and he's going to go gather signatures. Unless he doesn't get the signatures, it will go to a primary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The process there. I mean, so
yeah.
So what is it you want to change? What is it that you see? What did you want to change at the Alpine School District? What are the things that you, since it hasn't changed in 50 years, we got the same problems. What are some of the key?
There are things. This is the thing that's really interesting. If you look at the college level has a lot more free market principles involved in it because you're paying tuition. It's just like you said, I'm paying money for it, right? And so now I'm more invested in it, right? But the colleges also have to look at it from a profit standpoint as well, and they have to look at it. And if you look at BYU, they're looking at it from a profit standpoint, right?
Yep.
So when you were in college, did you ever sit in a class with 400 kids in an auditorium? You know, I know I did. I had some classes with huge, auditoriums full of people, right?
Yeah.
But then I also had classes where there were 15 people in the class, and I've been teaching. I taught the first 10 years of my career. I taught English. Okay, the last 17 years of my career, I've taught financial literacy. Now, I was an English major in college, but one of the things I did while I was in college is I got licensed as a financial planner, and I did that as a side gig for a lot of years while I taught school, okay? And so I worked with ING Financial Partners, and I sat down with lots of families helping them out with their finances. So when that subject became a graduation requirement in Utah, I'm like, I want to teach that. That's what I want to teach, right? But let me tell you this. You could put 200 kids in an auditorium in my financial literacy class, give me a $10 an hour aide to help me correct some stuff and put grades in and things like that, and I could teach all the kids financial literacy at one school, no problem, one teacher, okay? And then what you could do is you could take and reduce the class loads in an English class where you're having to read papers and give feedback on those papers. The workload for an English teacher compared to a financial literacy teacher is not close to the same.
Interesting.
But yet we just continue to stack 35 kids in every classroom, no matter what subject, no matter who the teacher, no matter how much experience that teacher has, and it's socialism at its best.
Yeah.
Really, And so, to kind of maybe start to pilot some of those ideas and pilot some of those things. We have the technology nowadays that, why can't we, put a bunch of kids in an auditorium and teach them a subject, How many kids need to be in a PE class? Can you have more than 35 there?
Yeah, you could. For sure.
And then in your calculus class, you should have 10.
Yeah.
So, but we just continue to stack 35 in every classroom, no matter what.
Well, one of the things that stands out as you were saying that is, we talked about kids being gifted in sports or whatever, right?
Sure.
They're going to be on the first team. They're going to be the state champions. They're going to win region. They're doing all this stuff, right? Yeah. I know that there's a little bit of that with. If you're really good at math, you pursue that. but there is kind of like a top out, right? There's a cap that you're going to get in high school, education wise, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, maybe a kid that was really gifted in that, like you're saying, maybe it's down to where there's only 3 kids in a particular class, right? Because they are gifted, they're gonna give back some way, right, into society, or they're gonna go on and they're gonna be pursuing something that they're just naturally good at, right? I mean, and it would, when you say pilot some of these things, I mean, if what's the resistance in that, right? It's crazy because I'm like, okay, go from 8 to noon, no lunch. I mean, mine's, but you get down in the actual curriculum, I'm done, right? I mean, I don't have anything to add.
No,
you're saying this, it's
and,
like...
And you know what, I like your idea too. There's a lot of wasted time in schools. There really is. We do 4 periods a day, right?
Yeah.
If you go 8 to 12 and you go an hour for 4 periods, there's no reason why you couldn't do that, right? Just some of the other things, like we go in Alpine School District right now, for example, we have an A day and a B day, and we do 4 periods on A day, and we do 4 periods on B day. All right, we start at a certain time and we end at a certain time on both those days. Now, it seems it's sometimes like the tail's wagging the dog. You know what seems to dictate the schedule in Alpine School District? The buses. Okay? The buses oftentimes are dictating when you start and when you finish so that the buses can be there to pick up these students here at this time and that time. And like the buses are dictating our schedule to us. Not data, not science, not looking at when do teenage kids learn the best? Okay?
Yeah.
Not what time in the morning should they start learning. All right? Here's my idea, right? You know what I think every kid should do first period? A PE class. All right? And every teacher at that school should have some physical activity they could do with the students. I can take them in the wrestling room. I can take them in the weight room. I may not be endorsed in it, and you may get a lot of PE teachers that might get mad at me, but most of the teachers at the school might have some type of a background in something, in exercise or anything like that. But get the kids going. Get them going in the morning,
You know what? I know, don't they do that with some of the sports anyway? It acts as one of the periods.
Yes, but it's usually the 4th period of the day, not the first period.
Right, yeah. So it's interesting, right? I mean, but juggling a couple things like that, and coaches are a part of that, right? And then you have the gym teachers that may be a part of when you just say this, right? I mean, you come up with an idea like that, right? Which any life coach that I've talked to, right? It's like, all right, I'm going to get my crap together, right? What's one of the first things they tell everybody? I don't care who, where you get this from. Get your ass out of bed, do your meditations and stuff in the morning, and go work out, right? If you can do that, and then you can. It doesn't matter what you do after that, right? You can be a therapist, you can be a coach, you can be a real estate guy. Go on with your day after that. You get up, you do your physical activity. Your day is going to be better, right? So that's interesting. Now, what are they going to do? Well, you go to the gym. I see there's always that lady that's at the gym that's on the stair climb thing, and she's like there for like an hour. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
Man, she's like, she can kick everybody's butt. You know what I mean? And that thing is like, yeah, I'm not even going to get on that. I don't get on that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? For lots of reasons, right? But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to achieve that, right? But I guess what I'm saying is like, you flush that stuff out earlier, right? There would be a PE teacher that he doesn't need to be offended. He's going to get some of those kids that are at a higher level, right?
Sure.
But everybody's doing that first class.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, sorry.
I mean, yeah. Why not? Right? Like, wake up in the morning, get them going.
Yeah.
How could you implement something like that, man? There have to be so much it would change. But this is part of you may say, why do these things never change? Why doesn't it happen? And I'm gonna. This is where I get myself in a lot of trouble, but I've done it for 27 years, so I really don't care. All right, but I think one of the biggest obstacles to change in education is the teachers' union. They fight every and any change ever. Okay, I went up to the state capitol just this last week, and I testified on behalf of a bill that I think would be a huge step in the right direction. I think it's a small step, but I think it's a better step than what's been taken. But basically what the bill does is it makes it so that the unions have to recertify every 5 years to show that they actually have 50% or more membership of their constituents, okay? The members of the union have to opt in every year so that it's not like you're not being pressured to be in the union. You're actually choosing to opt into it if you want to be a member of it. And it passes on any expenses that are incurred by the district for payroll deductions or anything of that nature are going to be paid by the union, not by the schools, not by the school districts, okay? And I think
that's what's being proposed.
Yes, that's a bill that's up there right now. So the reason I tell the story, I like the bill, I support the bill, but I go up there, right? I am one of maybe 5 school teachers supporting this bill. There are 2 overflow rooms full of school teachers that are against this bill. Now, does that mean that all school teachers are in favor of the union and against this bill, and only me and a few others are for this bill and want to see some change? No. What it means is that the unions have the money, the power, the infrastructure. There were 10 lobbyists that were entering the room as I was coming into that room that are union lobbyists, okay? And the amount of money that those people are putting into mailers and sending out to their constituents, come out, come out, come out. You know how many people I talked to that knew this bill was even exist? Not very many.
Yeah.
You know? And there are lots of us that understand the values of a free market system, but we just don't have an organization that represents us, you know? And so that power
teachers
that they
union?
have, just one, yeah. And I could tell you story after story about how I've tried to battle that throughout the years, but they have an absolute monopoly on the voice for teachers, okay? But they don't represent a lot of us. Yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to say to that. Now, I saw a post that you had made. I think it had something to do with this, where you did testify, and then, but you had used an example. I think you tried to get some people, and they'd blocked you. I mean,
so
there was a lot of things, and I just thought that was interesting. We had already, in fact, I think it was I'd commented on something there, and that's what brought us together, I think, to have this discussion, which everybody, like I said, everybody that knows me right now, I'm talking about it all the time. And my kids are out of school, except for now my grandkids are coming up. And I'm like, something's got to change. Something has got to be here for, it's the world's changed. The world's changed a lot. You know what I mean? In this time frame, the schooling has got to change. Something's got to change, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell you that story because it's really interesting. But it was a bill that was passed probably about 10 years ago. Okay. And once again, it was a legislature that was trying to say, hey, there's more voices than just those teachers that belong to the union that are trying to be heard, okay? And so I belong to an organization, but it's pretty sporadic, right? But the organization that I belong to, the main reason that I belong to it is because it provides me with liability, okay, and the protection that I need as a teacher. But about 10 years ago, this legislature passed this bill, and it basically said, if the school district allows the union to do this, they've got to allow any other organization the same opportunity to do that. So if you let the union speak at faculty meeting, you've got to let Cole's organization speak at the faculty meeting. If you allow, and sorry to be called, it's the Association of American Educators, really what I should say, but if you allow the teachers, the union to do this, you've got to allow any other organization to have that same opportunity, right? Well, one of the places that the union recruits their members big time is at these new teacher orientation meetings. So you're a brand new teacher. You're coming in, you're being trained by the district, okay? You're going into these meetings, they're teaching you about different policies and procedures of the school district. Okay? And then what happens is for lunch, you go into the lunchroom and they got a little sign up there with your school name on it, and you sit down at that table with any other new teachers at your school, and there's a union rep there with an application for each one of you to fill out. And they almost make it feel like it's a part of this process. It's just a part of what you do as a new teacher. Now you got to sign up for the union, right? And so I went to the district, I went to Alpine School District, and I said, look, I want to be a part of that lunch. Okay, and since you're providing that opportunity for them, this new bill, you have to provide that same opportunity for me. Okay, and they said, well, no, that's a little bit different because they're paying for that lunch. And I said, what if I paid for half? They didn't expect that, right? They said, well, they kind of backpedaled a little bit. I said, look, I'm going to offer to pay for half. And I went out and I got sponsors. I got people to back me. Will you pay for half the lunch for these new teachers? Okay, and I got sponsors, and they said, okay, I got people to pay for half the lunch. I go back to the district and I says, I got the money to pay for half of that lunch. Will you allow us the opportunity to share in that lunch? And they said, no, you can do your own lunch. We'll do 2 lunches. I said, you're going to do two lunches in the same building? Yeah. So you do a lunch, they'll do a lunch, and we'll let the teachers choose what lunch they go to. Okay? So I show up at the new teacher orientation. The new teachers are meeting in the auditorium, okay? And the lunchroom is right across the hall from there, which is where they put the UEA in their lunch, okay? They put me in a room on literally the other end of the school. Okay.
That's horrible.
Yeah. And so I've got lunch. I'm down there on the other end of the school, okay, with lunch, all ready to go. It was my own lunch, but what we were and there were literally 2 teachers found us out of probably 300 new teachers in Alpine School District. 2 of them, you know. And so it's those types of games, you know. And so you've got district personnel that's in bed with these union reps, and they were former union reps themselves, a lot of them, and it's, man, I've spent 27 years just pounding my head against trying to move forward any positive change in education, and the teachers union's just going to beat it down. So I'm coming from a different direction though. If you know, I'm a fighter, right? And I just, you know, so, and yeah, part of the reason we kind of talked about, you know, the reason why I lost in my last election, I'm going to run again. And I'm not afraid to lose. If I keep losing, I'm okay with that. But part of why I'm running is I want to get the message out. I want people to hear these stories. I want people to know what's going on in education.
Yeah, because there is no other option. How does somebody buy in if they're not being given any other, right?
Sure.
Which is very elementary, right? I mean, you say that's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. Well, there's no other voice, right?
Sure.
It's very interesting, actually, as you talk, lay this out, how it works, because it's like, I wouldn't know how to do it. I don't know of another organization that has that, right, still. I mean, it's like, so it hasn't changed because the structure hasn't changed, really.
Right.
The structure hasn't changed. It's Utah what is it, UEA?
Yes, yep, the Utah Education Association.
Association. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
You know, even things as simple as in Alpine School District, there's in policy, they negotiate with the organization that has the most members, and that's what it says in the policy, okay? And so, again, the policy has created a monopoly. There's no other voice at the table when you negotiate on behalf of teachers.
So that's it. That is it. That is the single reason. Nothing. It can't change. It
so
would never change.
when I say this bill that's being proposed is a good step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. One of the things that I have tried to push with some legislatures, and if this bill passes, I want to push the envelope even a little bit more. But we need legislation that will prevent that that says districts cannot have a policy where you're exclusively negotiating with one organization and one voice for teachers.
Is there any other state that has made some headway?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. The union is very powerful nationally as well as around. I mean, I wish we were as red as I thought we were in Utah. We're kind of moving towards purple, okay? And I really don't know where you stand in politics. We haven't had those deep discussions, but even as red as we thought Utah was, the union has had a chokehold on education here for over 50 years easily.
So I don't know how, unless you can get buy-in, right? I mean, when do they vote on this? Do you know? Does it go? By the time
it did pass out of committee, so that's a good step. Yeah, that's a good step in the right direction.
Generally, if it does pass in committee, then it.
Yeah. So now it will move to the floor, and then it has to pass. I think it's starting in the House first, and then it will go to the Senate if it passes the House. But I know out of committee there were 2 Republicans that voted against it. There were a few Democrats that voted against it, but it still passed by a pretty good majority. Yeah.
What is it that's passing though? For sure,
it basically makes it so that the unions have to certify that they have the majority of membership, but then it also makes sure that the union members have to opt into membership
on an annual basis, so that they're not just automatically rolling over and
correct. And the union knows the reason they're fighting it so hard is because if teachers have to opt in every year, a lot of them they're going to evaluate that decision on an annual basis and say, what are they providing? What are they giving to me? Is this worth me paying this money to them to pay these union dues? And a lot of them, if they have to review that on an annual basis, may decide against it. So will it hurt their membership? I anticipate it will. It has in other states where bills similar to this has passed. And will it minimize the power of the union? I hope so, quite frankly. Yeah.
Change, right? We talked about that.
Sure.
What can change it? So there was private schools here. In fact, that's a growing thing that there was not a lot of private schools when we were younger, at least that I remember. I don't remember kids going to a private school. There's more homeschool, it seems, now. Yeah. There is these charter schools that came in charter. I don't know if charters have much of a but when I saw this happening, right, and my kids were younger at that time, I still just sent them to the public school. I didn't think that there was a lot of really good options still, so that's what I did.
I think that's going to start changing. I do think that people are starting to take a more serious look at what public education is providing for kids, because I do think that it's, coming back to free market principles, right?
Right, yeah.
There needs to be competition, and you need to be able to make decisions about what's best for your student, And if you're making a very conscientious decision about going to this school versus this school, when we grew up, you went to the school you lived in elementary school, you went to the school you lived in, the boundaries you lived in junior high, and you went to the school boundaries you lived in high school, right? And you're seeing that change quite a bit. There's a lot of people that complain about transferring in sports and things like that. Well, if I feel like for my kid, this is the best school for my kid, why wouldn't I send him there?
Yeah, for sure.
If I think that's going to provide him with the best opportunity and the best experience for him, why wouldn't I send him there?
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right?
Sure.
I mean, lots of reasons. Maybe just get him a new friends, whatever. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it is a very structured and powerful. I don't know why they're holding on, but you say that, right? So it opens up free market. Man, it could really change if those principles were applied, right?
Absolutely.
You could have schools that were paying teachers where a teacher would be weighing, let's see, do I go to work for, right?
Sure.
For Texas Instruments, or am I going to go, right? I mean, because you would have that, right? There would be a draw enough Whereas if you're that type of teacher now, right, and you're there and you're in the program and you're doing everything the best you can, you're giving up. I mean, there's no pay scale that's going to pay you, right, to be in that. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. And that's the other argument I have. Like, I think it ends up being better for teachers if there are schools competing for the best teachers. Guess what you got to do? You got to pay them. You got to pay them better than other schools.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
You got to pay. Yeah, and it comes down to the teacher, right?
Right.
We've seen how athletic programs have brought kids to a school, right?
Sure. Correct.
And I've heard some of those coaches get paid extra, more. I don't know. Is that you hear different things. Whether that's
I mean,
at the end of the day,
there's ways coaches can make money outside of their addendums from coaching, camps, clinics, things like that. So there's a lot of ways that they can, supplement that and do different things to make extra money here and there. And so, yeah, I mean, you provide them with unique opportunities, and that's where,
I mean, you look at it, right, and it would make them have decisions where some schools just may not have the sporting programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're part of the district, so how does that pan out, right?
Mm-hmm.
If each kid's getting the same amount in allocation, and you don't have to maintain fields or again, I'm not trying to get away from that, but you start to weigh it, right? The discussion can happen, and you might have a school that is just geared for mathematics, engineering, whatever technology that would be. There's a lot of kids that are driven to that.
See, that's where the charter. That's where your charter schools come into play. Okay, because the idea of a charter school is that they have a specific charter or a specific goal that they're trying to achieve at that school. Okay, now we don't have any of these in Utah, and I'm actually glad we don't. But there's a school in Colorado that is a charter school for wrestling. Okay, I don't know that those kids are getting any type of like real education. Okay, but they're phenomenal wrestlers. Okay, and they spend a good chunk of their day wrestling. Okay, and they come to that school to wrestle. All right, and I wouldn't do it for my kid. I wouldn't choose it for him. And I'm a diehard in that sport. But there are schools in Utah that are there's I want to call it UCAS. I think that's the right name for it. But it's geared towards science and mathematics, and the kids at that school are very focused on an engineering trade, for example, or some type of trade in science, and they're very focused on that. They're having a tremendous amount of success at that school with kids that are really dialed into mathematics and engineering. If you've got kids that are dialed into business and you want to do a charter school that's kind of focused on that, I think there's some value there. And so, there's, the whole charter school movement created a little bit of competition. It's interesting to me, but in Utah County, especially Alpine School District, when charter schools first started out, it wasn't really popular in Utah County, but then Alpine School District instituted a math program at the elementary level that had parents up in arms, okay? And yeah, and the parents were just, are you kidding me? This is how we're going to teach our kids math? And the district basically took the position, we're the experts, shut up, and send your kids to our schools, all right? And that's when you saw a whole bunch of charter schools pop up in Utah County, right? And then
I didn't realize that was. I know what you're talking about. The time period.
Yeah, and then what happened is Alpine School District had to step back and say, "Oh, whoa, we're losing a bunch of kids. Maybe we should look at offering a few different options." But what drove the change with Alpine School District? Competition, right? They felt like they had all the power, all the control, all the decision making. We're the experts. Do what we tell you to do. until they started losing clients. And that's what has to happen in education. More of that, the consumer looking at what's best for my child and is putting my child in this school, in Alpine School District or Provo School District or Nebo School District, what is best for my kid.
Very interesting. I mean, in terms of that, you point that out, and I think it's just, you're sitting here looking at it, it would create some differences, right? The discussion would just happen, right? If you had in those options and it wasn't, this is what we're doing, right?
Right.
That drive that. But I think a lot of the parents just feel they don't know what input, right? I mean, when the district takes a position like that, right? And I don't remember, I didn't have kids doing that math, but I remember there was some discussion with it, and they were telling me about it. I'm like, I don't even, math of all things, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a language, right? It's like, why are we changing? You know what I mean? It's like 2 + 2 = 4. It doesn't matter how many times you want to.
But here's what changed, and it's called investigations math, right? And basically what changed is you used to memorize your times tables when you were a kid, right?
Yep. 12.
Yeah, they went away from memorizing your times tables. You could tell me what 3 times 9 is right now, right? But the kids now, what they're wanting them to do is go, okay, there's 3 9s, and 9 + 9 + 9 is 27. Oh, okay, and the process of getting there, it's a logical process, and it's a process, but you and I memorized it, and then later on in life we figured out, oh, that means there's 3 9s, and when you add them together, it's 27, right?
Yeah.
And
there's a natural.
But they're teaching them that first, and then abandoning the memorization part of it. And I'm getting kids in financial literacy right now, and I'll do a 10%. I'm looking at compounding interest, or if I'm looking at teaching them how to figure out how interest works on a loan, I have to do 10%, because if I did 9%, they couldn't do it. If I did 7%, they couldn't do it. But now what I will do is I'll get on a spreadsheet, on a Google Sheet with them. I'll teach them how to put it into a Google Sheet and calculate it and formulate it in there, and they can do that no problem, right? But the actual process of figuring out the math, they struggle with it, Yeah. So, and it's the way we're teaching math at the elementary level.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So what other ideas? What do you have? What other things would you change? Or is this a format to talk about?
One of the things, and this is where it's kind of funny, because we talked about the teachers union, right? And how I feel like they've kind of handicapped the education system. I'm 100% convinced that if I get elected to any board anywhere, whether it be an Alpine School District or the state of Utah, the teachers will end up loving me. All right. And it's because one of the things that I think has to happen in education is you've got to give the teachers more voice and more power and more of a say in what happens in their classrooms. We've handicapped teachers in the classroom nowadays. If a teacher wants to implement an attendance policy, they can't really implement that attendance policy unless the district
Changes
approves it.
Oh,
you know what I mean? And unless the district attendance policy is in line with it, right? And so teachers are trying to enforce attendance, hey, I've got participation points in my class, or this, or this, or this. And there's they can't really enforce it because the district won't support them, and the principals at the school level, there's so much pressure on them to graduate kids that you can't hold kids accountable, and so teachers, their hands are tied, and they're struggling to know, hey, I want to teach my subject. I want kids to learn. But I also want to teach them some of these life skills. I want to teach them accountability. I want to teach them responsibility, and those are lessons that we're abandoning in education.
So the teachers the teachers would love
Absolutely.
latitude. Every
Yeah.
single teacher would love latitude if they knew that they could do that, right? I mean, is
Sure.
there anybody that, I mean, they join the union. I mean, they're so different, right? I mean, they come from every background there is too, right? But it hasn't changed, right? And we now know why. I mean, there's a reason for that. Just the structure. I mean, when you have every district saying they're going to negotiate with the majority, right, or the largest, only with them, right?
Yeah.
What are other ideas? I mean, that are out there. I mean, I'm not trying to put you on.
Yeah.
You would change because it is like, right. You got to get on the board. You got to find out these things and then see. But I think,
yeah, there's a lot of curriculum that's very manipulative curriculum, these are a couple catchphrases and key words that you're going to hear in education coming up nowadays. But there's a lot of curriculum nowadays that's really trying to indoctrinate students into a liberal mindset.
yeah,
And recognizing the dangers of that curriculum and trying to fight against it, I think is something that's really important. Racism. I served an LDS mission in Cape Town, South Africa. Okay. I was there when Nelson Mandela was running to be the first black president of South Africa. All right. I saw racism. I mean, it was horrible. Okay. And just real racism in terms of hate based on the color of your skin.
yep,
I've seen what racism looks like. I saw, the first 3 months that I was in South Africa, they held a referendum vote to decide if they're going to let the blacks vote in the next election. And it was a unique cultural experience, just to say the least. And to be there when Nelson and Mandela's getting elected as president of South Africa was just unique, really a neat experience for me, right? But I watch what they're calling racism now, and I'm flabbergasted. If I try to hold you accountable for something that you've done wrong, I'm not a racist. You made a mistake, and I'm holding you accountable for it. It has nothing to do with who your mom and dad is. It has nothing to do with what the color of your skin is. It has nothing to do with any choice that you've made in your life, who you choose to have sex with. You made a choice. There are consequences to those choices. And we've created a scenario where, again, we're handicapping kids because we're not teaching them those important lessons of life. We're not teaching them to be accountable. We're not teaching them to be responsible. We're not teaching them to have consequences to their choices. And as we enable them through the system, we're only handicapping them for life. We're not helping them.
yeah, and tripping our whole nation, right, with what we have been. It's difficult to look back. I mean, almost all the problems we had were north-south, right? I mean, as it started out, right? I mean,
Sure.
policies. I've read a lot on that subject, actually. I mean, being raised in Utah in the 70s and 80s, 90s, in that period, there was not a lot of color, period.
Sure.
And I was ignorant. I thought I had certain ideas of this, that, and the other. I went to LA on my mission, first area, Paramount, Compton, and in a time when there was a lot of that, a lot of gangs and things like that. But I just had exposure. Right? More than anything, I just had exposure to other people, right, which is interesting, right? I mean, and I look back, it's like, man, I did have some weird views when I was younger,
Sure.
And I don't know where they came from. I don't think it was. I think it was just, if you live in isolation from some things, right?
Yeah, there's ignorance, sure, yeah.
But there was, all these things that have happened over this last little bit. There's some people that have stood out to me, right? And I would say some black individuals. You say the racism. Thomas Sowell,
Sure.
who I thought was dead, but he's still alive. I mean, and his position
he's
that he
brilliant.
took. He's
Yeah.
brilliant, and he says
Yeah.
things in a way that no other white person could say it because they're not black. So
Correct.
he said, so it's like, very interesting. He's like Martin Luther King. As I've gotten older, I understand that he was trying to put a message forward that's like, you know what? I've got this dream. It doesn't happen overnight, right? And so if there's ever a time, and I think of Morgan Freeman talking with that Lemon,
Don Lemon.
Don Lemon,
Yeah.
and Lemon's trying to like bait him on it, and Morgan's just like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, you're the anchor of CNN. I'm on your show. We're two black guys, right? Having a discussion. I'm not buying it, right? It's like, are you kidding me? I've had the best life, right? I mean, I've got a great life. Now, has he been called bad names before? I'm sure. Morgan Freeman, right? I mean, he's not getting caught up on that, right? Which is, to me, more laudable. It's a guy that saw what it was, and he realized, hey, you know what? You can't keep me down if I keep working my ass off, right?
Right.
And so I see these, and that's the biggest thing. Raising my kids, period, and my grandkids say, you guys can do anything you want. No, I don't want to. Don't say what you can or can't do. You can do anything you want, right? It's like I'm a champion for that, right? So it's like, where did this other stuff get into it, right? It's very interesting. And unless we can have the conversation, right? I know some of the things I even just said right there could offend some people, right? And I don't understand all the things with woke. You know what I mean? Like how these companies would take it, and like they're getting these people, like white people that have to stand up. It's like, I'm sorry, that I'm racist. Because if there's been a time, I would say that there was more racism in the 80s.
Sure.
That as time's gone on, if there's a time that there's been less and more, and they're trying to bring up all this stuff, who's trying to do this, right? That's what I'm saying. It seems like it's organized and to cause problems.
A division, cause a division, sure.
Which then I plug into some of these other people that, and they're saying, well, this is how they did it in Russia, right? Mm-hmm. And the liberal way is the right way. And I'm like, damn it, you know what? Not only did the wall come down in Russia in '89, right? And I witnessed that, and this change that took place, the capitalism with all of its flaws and problems, right? And this that you incentivize people, that will always win, right? It'll always win out. With all the problems, right?
Sure.
We still have to work through all of our other
Sure.
cultural issues with that. It doesn't resolve everything, right?
Yeah.
But, and I point to North Korea now and South Korea. I mean, there's this huge difference. Now, capitalism has its own problems. I was told that they have a huge fertility issue, right? They're not repopulating. The South Korean people, with all the advancements in technology, one of the downsides is they're like, we like having everything. To have a couple
It's
extra
expensive.
kids takes away, man.
Yeah.
It's going to screw my career up, right?
Right.
Because they got every opportunity to. So I mean, those are new problems, right? They're new problems, right? There was East and West Germany, right?
Right.
And I talk to people. I mean, you got East Germany. There would be these shows. It was like dark. They didn't have a light. I mean, they were still using like kerosene, right? And lighting their homes and stuff like that. It's just very interesting things. In my life, I have seen the difference, right? Yeah. And I've seen the race that was there. I don't know how we can have this conversation anymore, and yet, you know what I mean? And without it addressing the real problems, right? Because there are some other real problems that we're having.
There are, yeah, for sure.
And if the thing comes up with abortions and things like that, and it's like, man, statistically, it looks like the people hurt the worst have been the black people, in those communities where they've just decimated through abortion and things like that. And I'm like, I didn't know that, right? I mean, so there's things that have come out that I just didn't know, right?
See, but a lot of times it's perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's, I'll share two stories with you that I think will illustrate it. But one, I was an English major at BYU in a feminist English department, okay? Now, I was a male athlete who kind of had a job already lined up because I was going to be a coach and because that school wanted me to come coach there. All right?
Yeah, I understand.
They hated me for that.
Really?
Oh, those ladies, they hated me for that. And the one wasn't shy about it. She flat out told me. All right? And I sat down in her office and I said, look, I says, you can feel however you like about me, as long as you have the integrity to give me the grade that I earn in this class. I don't
That's
care.
all you wanted,
I don't
right?
care how you feel about me.
Yeah.
Right. But like, I could have very easily like been a victim of this feminist English department at BYU. Right. Now, I tell that part because I think it's kind of the perspective of how you choose to, move through your situation, right? Was I targeted because of some attributes of mine? Absolutely, I was. There's no doubt that I was being targeted because I was a male athlete. Okay, hey, there's a stereotype that sometimes goes along with coaches in education. All right.
Yeah.
But I wanted to blow through every one of those type of stereotypes. Being intelligent is important to me. Being informed is important to me. So I tell that one. But now, I told you I went through a divorce. Okay, and it was a little bit of a struggle. And one of the things I used to do to just kind of take my mind off things, I'd go out and drive Uber. Okay. And I'd drive people around. And one night I picked up, it was literally back to back. And I picked up a black guy from Chicago. And I'm talking to him about Utah, what brought you to Utah. He says, the economy brought me here. A job brought me here. I'm here because of this. I'm here because of that. I said, how do you feel about Utah? I hate Utah. Utah's one of the most racist places I've ever seen and this, that. And he was just going on and on about how horrible Utah was. Right. And part of me in the back of my mind was like, man, the reason you're here is because of the policies of Utah. Okay. You have a job because the policies of Utah are creating a thriving economy. And that's why you're here. Okay. But I was trying to be sympathetic and listen and understand and trying to understand. There are some things with our culture that are definitely backwards.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure, of course.
And could they be perceived as racist? Absolutely. I get it, right? So then literally the very next guy I pick up, another black guy, okay? And he was from Detroit, okay? So like Chicago, Detroit, they're big cities back east, right?
Yeah.
Not much of a difference there. And I'm talking to this guy, and I'm like, what brought you here? Oh, the jobs, the economy. Utah's, thriving and got a great economy and stuff. And we get into Utah, and I start kind of trying to test him out to see if he'll say some of the same things the first guy said, And he wasn't taking my bite. He wasn't biting on it, right?
Yeah.
So I just flat out asked him, right? And I'm like, hey, I just had a guy in the car, and he says that Utah is one of the most racist places he's ever been. He's like, that dude ever been to Alabama? And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. He's like, Utah is one of the best places I've ever been. He says, the people here are so good to me. They treat me so well. I love being in Utah. He says, I get the stereotypes. I know it's, pretty vanilla and everything like that, but I've had a tremendous experience in Utah. And it was like back to back, and I'm like, it's sometimes just about your perspective. What are you choosing to look at? How are you choosing to respond to the situation? So
very interesting. No, because it all falls in, right? I mean, this is the issues we're talking about. And you say that the liberal, the agenda, the unions themselves is to protect, right? I mean, to protect the people that it's there. And I mean, I think I don't know. I don't know all of it other than what you tell me is like, okay, that's why things haven't changed, right?
Sure.
Could it be worse? Maybe it could be worse, for an education system. I mean, I would have said more of that. I think that's why I didn't buck a lot of the stuff until the policies of...
Yeah, there's DEI. Yeah.
It's where they went to 1691 or where they went back and that the country was started on slavery, right? I mean, that was whereas... my ancestors do go back up to Maine, right? It was religion, right? I mean, that's why they came here. They didn't like the way things were being run over there. They wanted to have their own thing, right? And then as it went, well, my other ancestors were like, hey, we want our own thing out in Utah. You know what I mean? It's it drove a lot of it, right? What the true beliefs of what they right, wrong, or indifferent, right? And that's where I come from. I can't change that, right? That's what I come from, and I'm proud of a lot of that heritage, right? There wasn't. I did have some. One side of my family goes down to Georgia, and they don't have a lot of nice things, you know what I mean, to say on that. If I get back a generation or two, but that's changed. None of my cousins have any of those thoughts or feelings at all. Zero, right? There has been a change in our culture, and it took a long time to root that out. We had a civil war, decimated this country, right? And I feel like, I hear a lot of people talk about the Civil War, another new Civil War with all these things and changes. I'm like, man, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. We got it. We can figure this out, right? We should be able to do it. And that does tie in because we've got. I think it does tie into everything that we're talking about.
Well, I'll come back to this. I'll tell you the biggest war I think we are fighting, and it's ignorance. You know, and education is a big part of creating a culture of ignorance, and we've got to teach kids how to think.
Ignorance. I agree. Yeah. Ignorance and that elite, like you said, top down. This is Alpine School District. Mm-hmm. This is how we're teaching math, right? And so there's a lot of that comes, and for some reason, Thomas Sowell talks a lot about that. I mean, I've read a lot of his books.
Yeah.
I've thought, in fact, there's two interesting. You know, when I was being just 3 years older than you, you remember the show Donahue? It was like the first talk show.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman was an economist back in that time, and he was he started bucking the things which kind of led to Reagan becoming,
right.
You know, with those policies altogether, right? Free market, right?
Yep.
Open things up.
Right.
It's hard to do. You know, Trump had all this kind of protection stuff, you know, and you get back to free market and opening things up, and okay, you know, nothing's easy, right? It's not easy, but I can look through all the different policies, why they came out and what they were trying to do, right? But Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman. I mean, I was looking for some things, right? And when this AI came out, actually, I've done a lot of reading even in the last year on from some of these books. I was putting it out there, and Andrew Carnegie, right? It was still giant, you know, and he had a quote that he would always say, you know, people get too distracted, you know, don't divide your eggs, put all your eggs in one basket, and then watch that basket, right? That was his thing, right? Watch that basket, manage that basket, right, of eggs. Focus on something, just do something, right? Like become an expert in something. You know, I mean, I don't remember all the things I was taught, but I've always remembered that, right? So I was trying to come up with this thing where I was going to be teaching. I had sometimes I'll teach new agents and things like that. Brought this up, and I said, what was it that brought Andrew Carnegie, and I did that he said, you know, keep all your eggs in one basket, you know, and then focus on that. And the damn AI was telling me, he was trying to say that don't put all your eggs in one basket, diversify and do, you know what I mean? And I kept asking, it's like, no, I'm going to see how far this thing's going to push. And he just kept doubling down, right? Coming up with more quotes. Like he said, it was wrong, flat wrong, right? Like on that thing. So there's a bias within ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, right? And it comes out. I've asked it about global warming, right? Because I've actually had, what is there with the polar ice cap in Antarctica? Supposedly that's grown as the northern, you know, as I don't know, right? I mean, I really don't know. I mean, you could tell me, you could come out with a documentary saying one way or the other. I don't know. I've not traveled to either one, right? I'd love to be able to do that type of stuff. I'm intrigued. I want to know. I don't want to contribute to the planet, you know, global warming, you know, climate change that's going to destroy for my great grandkids, right?
Correct.
I just want to know. I just want to know the damn.
We all want to be good stewards of the planet, right?
Right, stewards.
So
Yet, you know, and then this thing comes out, and then I'm watching something the other day, and the guy that was one of the founders of the Arbor Society, I think, or one of those, you know, the tree, which was a hardcore tree hugging place in the 60s and 70s, right? CO2. It's the gas of life, right? We have more green today than ever, right?
Right.
You know, so you got all these mixed ideas. I guess what I'm saying is people just shut it down, right? And if you're open, here's an interesting thing, right? If you're open to things, you're like, you know what, I'd like to hear more about that, right? Then you let that happen. And that there's something about that left ideology, right, that has, you know, no, we're shutting it down, right? We want to shut. It's like, well, how can you have the discussion, right? I don't know. And,
You know,
and I don't know if
see-
this, I don't necessarily want this going that direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With what we're talking about, because I don't necessarily. The point is what you said is what teacher would not want more options, right? To have latitude over their own classroom, right?
We learned a lot during COVID, did we not?
We did.
We learned some important lessons, but I'm not sure that everybody learned those lessons, you know, and part of this is me, the rebel school teacher, right, and pushing back. Like, I'm looking at masks, and I'm looking at data and what it's doing, and I'm analyzing numbers, and I'm looking at the psychology of kids, and I'm looking at the lack of personal connection, and because of, you know, if you had a student that was in my classroom that year where there were masks on kids, I wouldn't be able to recognize them. You know, I didn't make those personal connections. That, you know, like their whole face was covered up, right? And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, what are we doing, right? What are we doing to these kids? Look at the data and how this affects kids. Look at the data and you know, the thing that was absolutely amazing to me is that I'm arguing with what are supposed to be very intelligent people at the district office about the impact that this is going to have on kids, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm asking them to look at data, and the thing that was absolutely crazy to me, and this is the rebel school teacher, right? I'm going to county health meetings. I'm going to Utah County Commission meetings. I'm going to Alpine School District Board meetings, and I'm trying to figure out who's making these decisions, okay? And Alpine School District, every time I would ask them, who's making the decision to put these masks on our kids, okay? And it's the health department, Utah County Health Department, Utah County Health Department. So they kept pointing the finger over here at the Utah County Health Department, just across the hall here, right, or across the road, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, who's on the board of the Utah County Health Department, and when's their next board meeting? So I get on their website and I look it up, and they had a board meeting scheduled for like a week from now, right? So I show up at their board meeting. Guess who's on the board of the Utah County Health Department? The superintendent of Alpine School District. Okay?
Okay.
So
Right
when they're pointing the finger over here, I mean, like, are you not going to take any accountability for this decision? And what data are you using to make this decision? That's all I'm asking you. What data are you using to make this decision on behalf of our kids? Seems like a fair question. Could never get an answer. Not out of a board member, not out of a superintendent, not out of a Utah County Health Department board, not out of a county commissioner.
Yeah. Very interesting.
You know?
Are they appointed? Do they run for those appointments, or it's a networking thing, right? Almost?
Yeah, no,
a lot of them are appointed.
Yeah, I think they're appointed. Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. Keeping it on. I think it's all in the same spirit, right? It's trying to change the notion of these things. But I was watching that where they were talking about this global warming. That's been a topic because I really want to understand it. What are the pros and cons? What are we actually contributing? You know, those types of things. Mm-hmm. It's beyond my intellect altogether. You know what I mean? Because I'm just trying to flush out what makes sense to me. But there was that hearing, maybe you've seen it too, but they're giving, so these were the experts that were part of the federal government.
Right. Just like Anthony Fauci, right?
Exactly. Right. Which some of the things he said were very in line with what you would think, and then he would change it, right?
Yeah.
All these things were just crazy, and they were doing all those illegal things anyway, how they could get around it, right? Mm-hmm. And appointed people, this bureaucracy that's out there, well, the guy obviously did a little homework, he's questioning him, and he says, well, so what is, do you know what they kept saying it was doubling. We're doubling CO2 emissions in this, you know, and they're like, what is the percentage of, you know, and they're like, one's like 5%, I don't know. They didn't know. They didn't know, right? And so he pins them, right? I mean, it's one of those things. It's really embarrassing for every single one of them, where they all got down to where it's like, what do you think? Okay, I'm just going to go with what he said, 5%. And it was 0.04, right? So it went, and if you get to 0.02, that's when trees don't grow. I mean, we can't grow stuff on this planet, right?
Right.
So the doubling, which they said would happen, whether or not that happened exactly, right? The doubling point, we were borderline of being able to really grow things on this planet in that period, right? Which makes a lot of sense, actually, to be a farmer and how hard it would be to make, all these other implements, to where now we're at more green than ever, right? I mean,
Right.
not that it doesn't have its own challenges. What are the challenges here? But instead of having that discussion, they're having this expert panel, right? Which is interesting. I bring that up because what you're talking about, it's like, who makes those changes, decisions? And at the end of the day, I can say, even though things haven't changed in 50 years, I had a handful of teachers. Third grade teacher, the guy just got me. And I think he got a lot of the kids in the class, right? He was probably considered a little bit of a weird guy at Central. You went to Central?
Mr. Freeman.
Mr. Freeman, Jackie Lynn Freeman.
Yeah.
I came from Denver halfway through that year. That's when we moved here, right? So
Right.
my aunt and uncle died in a plane crash, and
Right.
so all that drama in our lives, and we came out here, and I had some. Well, so I would have went first, second grade, in Denver. Come out here halfway through the third year. I hated school right there. He just took me and he put me back by the door, right? And an ADHD type of kid. I mean, I couldn't do it, but I played chess. He had a chess program there. You know what I mean? So he involved me in things that I would do. So I look back at that, right? The kid, and he cut a deal with me that I just get to where like I got to go. Right, I got to leave the classroom. Right, I mean that's really what I'd be bouncing off the walls and driving the people next to me. So he put me on the end, right by the door, and he said, anytime you feel like you need to get up and go get a drink, use the bathroom, you can do it. Now, I know how long it takes to do that. If you need to just go down the hall, do it. Anyway, it changed night and day. Right, I mean I had a totally different experience. It was a good. There were some other teachers even throughout high school, and some of them. But without getting into that, the point is, they did make a big impact, right?
Sure.
Some of my coaches had a huge impact on me.
But yeah. But it's good. But it's good, right? That's a positive? See, that's where it's a positive attribute. Right, and I get you in my class, and I love that you're questioning everything, right? And I just like we've got to recognize, like, hey, we want people who question, who ask questions, who question government, who question authority, who question this, because it holds people accountable, and even in education, a rebel like you, we're going to find out how well can you deal with kids.
And I did want answers, right? I did.
Yeah.
Back then, it maybe didn't appear that way, right? But but the truth is, when I got an answer, I mean, sometimes there would be that answer that would come. It's like, hey, the reason we don't do it is because or the reason that guy's a hard ass over there, that the one scout leader that's like wanting to rap the kids all the time. His brother got his arm ripped off when they were doing some stupid thing, right? I mean, there was a reason. It's like, what? I can buy it. I can live with it. I can handle that. Yeah, you know what? He's a little different, but he wants to protect the kids from having something like that happen, because it totally affected his brother's life, right? Yeah. It's never going to happen under that scenario or that situation or whatever, but it doesn't matter, right? I mean, I got why the guy was like that, whatever. That's just one example in my brain. I'm thinking, but that's it. Generally, if I get an answer, I'll keep asking. It's interesting that what we have, because that's the nation we came from, right? Push, get better answers, innovate. If you find a new way to do things better,
right,
you're going to be rewarded for that, right?
Right.
And I think that's why I mean, that's not what I was thinking, to be innovative or be rewarded for that thing. I just wanted to know that we were doing things. I had a hard time working hourly jobs. When I came back, and my wife to this day will say, no, you couldn't work for anybody. They'd fire you, Justin. You would ask too many questions. Like, I don't think it'd be that case, because I have worked with some people before. I've had some consulting jobs, but it's like, yeah, I think there is something, right? I mean, some people are just going to keep pushing or asking, but I had a hard time working with people that I was I'm not. I wasn't pulling their weight. I was doing 2 times more. And there was a job I was doing drywall, right? And the little Mexican dudes could outwork me, right?
Sure.
I mean, and I was like, I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know how they brought their lunch and everything else. That's what I was doing. I was going through college because they was paying better than some of the other stuff, right? But I hated that we were all getting paid X, right, an hour. And that guy that wasn't, I couldn't communicate with him, but we knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were working together. But then there'd be some other guys, and they knew the owner, and they're coming, they're showing up. It just drove me crazy. I had a hard time in that environment, right? I could be probably more workable in some things, but for the most part, I think over time I've become that. But I applaud what you're doing to tell somebody. I haven't ran for any elections ever because people can take what you say and twist it. Right, I've seen that happen both sides.
Sure.
It's like, in fact, this Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
He says a lot of things. I'm like, I can't argue with that.
Sure.
He's got a lot of really good ideas. In fact, I'm not sure where he came from. And then I hear, his uncle, the president, was very conservative in a lot of things, right? I mean,
well, sure. Yeah. Comparatively speaking, I mean, I grew up in a home with a dad that was a Democrat, blue dog Democrat his whole life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he was a union steelworker guy,
Yep.
right? I thought I was a Democrat growing up my whole life too, But now you look at what a Democrat was when we were growing up versus what it is now. It's completely
totally
changed.
different. And I think there's something behind that. I don't know why or how it got to where it infiltrated our every facet of our community, right? And there seems to be, if you get away from the big cities and all the flyover states and the small towns, there is something that still would have appealed to every one of your dad. And my dad said he was an independent, back, and he was, because he was kind of in some jobs where you could advance if you weren't one or the other, right? And the government, he worked for the federal government, and Department of Interior, and anyway. I thought, no, you got to stand for something, Dad. He's like, hey, they're both going to spend. They're both going to spend. They're both going to just, depends on who was ever in there. So you get in the politics of it, and I don't necessarily love either one of them. But the point is, right, is that there's really not a lot of difference between us. That's the part that I guess, that black guy, the Mexican guy, he was just trying to make money to pay his bills and take care of his family and kids, right? He was older than me. I just was funding my lifestyle, a college guy. I wasn't married. I wasn't doing anything. I was partying a little bit after my mission. I come back, I'm like, I'm trying to find myself again, right?
Sure.
All this stuff, working on a hardcore crew of, but at the end of the day, we're not that different. We're not that different. The people, I don't know why we want to draw all these differences,
Right.
And I don't know, other than I went down that little rabbit hole talking about that. What I was trying to say is, to run for any elected, right? You got to get to the board.
Sure.
Alpine board. It's right in your community. It's your backyard. It's all those people. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I didn't track that as well. Maybe you would have posted some things on, but in your world, that was everybody, right? You go for the state board of education, right? And that same thing, right? You're going to make enemies, and people are going to say things that know nothing. They don't know anything about you.
Sure.
And they may actually be in alignment with you in their heart of hearts, right? But they've taken a line, and so they're going to try. So for somebody to say, I'm going to keep running, maybe that will wear them down, right? Because a lot of people don't have that. They don't have that. For me, it's like, you know what? I don't really like my clients, right? I can work with anybody. I say, it's like, I don't want to work with that guy, right?
Yeah.
We don't work well together. It's not him, it's me. It's just, but you put that in the political realm, it's hard. Right,
Yeah.
so I'm so glad that we were able to link up today.
Yeah, there's certainly a thick skin that comes along with it, and I'm ready for it. So
yeah,
I'm
excited. Hopefully, we can get some leverage, and because that's what we want. We want more discussion. That's it, right? At the end of the day, people can interpret that we've got a mutual agenda. And I didn't know how we were going to line up until we started talking about, And at the end of the day, I don't have the answers, but I know that if people talk about it enough, there will flush out, right?
Sure.
If there's not just one union, if you bought lunch, so did you bet you bought a lot of food that day, probably.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So you go down that road and it's like, wow, that's crazy. You know what I mean? That actually would happen, especially with all the new teachers coming in. right?
Right.
And you're the teacher that's saying, hey, you know what, we've got this. What was the alternative? Ultimately, with the other organization.
So it's called the Association of American Educators. Basically, it's a national organization. They don't take political stances on issues unless 60% or more of their membership agree on the issue. And they poll their members, right? Which is very contrary to what happens with the NEA and the UEA, right? They take whatever position they want to take and they pursue it no matter what, right?
Fall in line.
So that's one thing I appreciate it. But probably the biggest reason why I'm a member is I have a liability policy, and there's two reasons why a lot of teachers join the union. And number one is, if I get sued, I want that protection of that liability policy, right? And when you join the union, you get that protection. My association, I actually have a policy in my name, whereas with the union, it's their policy and they can choose to, file on your behalf. And then the other one is just the representation, the negotiation part of it. So, yeah.
Well, hats off. Hats
you.
off to you. Seriously,
Appreciate it.
You hear a lot of disgruntled people, but not anybody coming up with solutions.
Sure.
And I've always been shocked in that realm. When I start talking about alternative education in my home, my wife gives me that look. She's like, the kids are going to go to school, right? I mean, it fires people up, right?
Yeah.
And she agrees with me on every other thing. I mean, we're just in harmony. But she gets that. She's like, she thinks I'm going to try to indoctrinate the other way. It's like, no, I don't know. It just, like you said, it hasn't changed. I can't put my finger on it, right? Because I'm just not in it. You know what I mean? I just haven't been part of that, but I know it has a huge impact on our community. So awesome. Good. Thank you for spending that time.
Me. Yeah.
And we'll have maybe a future discussion on maybe see what happens with this legislation and see if it'll be this year that you're elected to the board, and you'll know actually early
probably
on.
In June. Yeah.
By June, because that's when the primaries are going to be completed
Yep.
at that point.
So, yeah.
Hats off. That's good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.